Hello, and welcome to the Fiction Nonfiction Podcast from Literary Hub, where we believe that every issue in your social media feed or on the evening news has already been tackled somewhere in literature. I'm Whitney Terrell, author of the novel The Good Lieutenant.
And I'm V.V. Ganeshananthan, also known as Sugi, author of the novel Brotherless Night. So wait, everyone's been gushing over Project Hail Mary, which is that new Ryan Gosling vehicle.
Have they? Is that? I haven't
That's
seen
what I
it.
hear. No?
Is there a literary? Does it have a literary source? Is there a book behind that one? Maybe I'll go read the book.
Yeah. It's a book by the science fiction writer Andy Weir, who also wrote The Martian.
Oh,
So
okay.
I also have not seen the movie, and I wasn't going to just because I'm so tired of CGI. But a puppeteer friend of mine told me that there are puppets in it, so now I'm gonna go.
I mean, I'll go see it. I'm a science fiction fan. I don't know. My problem is like getting to the movie theater, which means convincing my 16-year-old son that he wants to go to the movie too. Which I don't know. We'll see. He's very mad because we've gone to see some Marvel movies recently and they sucked, and he's like, I've had it with. But I'll tell him this is not a Marvel movie and it's cool and he should go see it.
Maybe he needs to talk to or hear a cool astronaut talk about space. And so, I don't know, I think between Project Hail Mary and Artemis II launching earlier this month, it is just about the perfect moment to have Colonel Chris Hadfield on the show today. He's with us to discuss his new novel, Final Orbit. Chris is one of the most experienced and accomplished astronauts in the world. He was the top test pilot in both the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Navy, and a Cold War fighter pilot intercepting armed Soviet bombers in Canadian airspace. A veteran of 3 space flights, he served as capsule communicator, Capcom, for 25 shuttle missions, as NASA's director of operations in Russia, and as commander of the International Space Station. Hadfield's books, An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth, You Are Here, and The Darkest Dark have all been international bestsellers and topped the charts for months in Canada. His 2 previous novels, The Apollo Murders and The Defector, were both instant #1 bestsellers. Chris, welcome to the show.
Wow, that's a lovely intro. Lovely to be speaking with you both as well, and thanks.
Well, we're very excited that you're able to join us. In addition to those accomplishments, we just listened. You're a musician and a writer and a public speaker. You played the International Space Station guitar. Is that a specific guitar or just a guitar that you played on the International Space Station?
So the space station has been orbiting the world for over 25 years. And as part of the initial gear that they put up there for psychological support for the astronauts, they took a page from the Russians, who had always had guitars on their space stations, and thought that's a good thing. It's portable. And it's everywhere on Earth. It's ubiquitous. You always have somebody who has a guitar somewhere. And it's a great way to celebrate standard life, birthdays and holidays, and sing songs that and so that guitar was put up on the space station in the belly of shuttle Atlantis in the summer of 2001, and it's been there ever since. It's a little Larry Vey guitar made in Vancouver in Canada, and so it's been around the world. If you do the math, I guess 140,000 round the world tours, that little guitar. And it's not a bad guitar. And I wrote and recorded a whole album up there.
That's amazing. So you've accomplished all of these things and been recognized, but at the very start was your career as an astronaut, which is a dream for many kids. It certainly was for me. I was born in 1967, so I remember the 72 missions for Apollo, the very last ones. Probably my earliest memories, some of my earliest TV memories. And you've written about how it was yours also in an astronaut's guide to life on Earth. Can you talk about learning about the missions like Apollo 11 as a child and how that made you want to pursue this path?
Yeah, about the age that you were starting to become aware of that, Whitney. For most kids, it's around 8 or 9 that your worldview starts becoming real. You're not just all, fantasy stuff, but you start to know what's going on. And I was that age when the first Apollo landing, Apollo 11, with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and Mike Collins orbiting, that's when I was really envisaging the fact that I was going to grow up to become somebody and become something. And I didn't really know, but I looked at what those people were doing, and I just thought that's the most exhilarating, challenging, interesting, amazing, historic thing that anybody on Earth is doing right now. And late 60s were a super tumultuous time with race riots and the Vietnam War and a corrupt president and all kinds of, strife. And yet at the same time, there was this great beacon of human capability. And it just took my heart away. And I thought, I'm going to turn myself into somebody who can fly a spaceship. And 26 years later, I had my first space flight.
I was thinking about that because I felt, we're in a similarly tumultuous time. And it is, I am a fan of the Artemis II missions and I've been following them, but they don't seem to have like grabbed everybody's attention in the way that those original missions did. Like it seemed like everything stopped. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe you would have been older than I was at the time and remember like how they were received.
Yeah, I think you're wrong because
okay.
Apollo 8, which was just before Christmas in '68, that's the one that was the first to go around the moon and come back, and hardly anybody noticed. I mean, it was just, okay, fine. And Apollo 9, most people don't even know Apollo 9 existed. Or Apollo 10, no interest. But Apollo 11, that's the one for the very first time in a 4 billion year history of life on Earth that any creature has set foot somewhere besides Earth. And so that was huge. And it's never to be repeated. You can't repeat the first footsteps on the moon by definition. That caught everybody's attention. But by Apollo 12, everyone was lost interest again. Apollo 13. People confuse space exploration with space entertainment. They're not synonymous. But for a brief period with Apollo 11 in the summer of '69, that really got people worldwide. One out of every 3 people on Earth was watching that live as Neil and Buzz walked onto the surface. So it was a huge impact. And, everyone's going, you want to have your Apollo 11 moment. Well, that's kind of a silly oversimplification of the reality of what was going on in history. And I'm not worried at all about it. There's been a huge optimistic observation of what's going on with Artemis II, and it will only accelerate when the next people actually walk onto the moon. But then, the moving finger writes and people will move on and pay attention to something else. That's not really the point of it. The point of it is, what does it do in human history? And that has real significance.
So we're talking to you on Friday, April 10th for our listeners, which is actually the last day of the Artemis II mission. I think that they land tonight, I think. And I'm curious about what day-to-day life is like for astronauts, like the ones who will hopefully land safely later today. And is it true that landing is the hardest part of the mission? I've been reading about this and I feel worried.
They're actually, we say landing, but they're watering. They're landing in the Pacific Ocean. They're splashing down is the term we've chosen. The landing is normally the easy part. It's slowing down is the hard part. And the speed that you need to go to the moon is about 25,000 miles an hour. And somehow, with no fuel, you have to slow down from 25,000 miles an hour to parachute speed. And the way we do that is just by letting the air slow us down. We come blistering into the atmosphere, 25,000 miles an hour, just whatever that Mach 34 or something like that, 434 times the speed of sound. And then it's just the pressure wave of pushing the air molecules out of the way that slows us down and crushes the crew into their seats and build up. It actually kind of tears the atoms apart. It rips the electrons off. So you have a plasma field like exists around the sun, around your vehicle. And it licks all around your windows. So like the yellow and the orange and the red flames of all of that energy being dissipated. And you're crushed in your chair up to about, depending how it goes, around 4 times your average weight. And for several minutes, you're crushed that way as the vehicle gets rid of all that energy. But then now you're just a flying object and you wait until the parachute's open and then you come down and hopefully, I think if we do it right, we'll hit the water at about 17 miles an hour vertically, which isn't soft, but it's easily survivable. And then the rescue divers will come out and the mission will have completed. But boy, that reentry is by no means a given, especially since no human being has ever flown this spaceship before, and no human being has ever flown it back down into the atmosphere before. So there's a lot of unknown unknowns, but we think we've got it right. And we decided, yep, now's the time to give it a try.
So, Artemis II is a flyby mission, but you were mentioning before that, Artemis IV is going to actually land on the moon in 2028 or so, which will be the first time in half a century. Why are we going back now? What's the scientific goal, and what's the political significance of planning these sorts of missions in that tumultuous time that, as Whitney was mentioning too?
It'd be fun if the three of us were having this conversation in about 1912 and speaking about Antarctica. It would be the same sort of thing. Like our technology was pretty weak to get there, and people were dying. The people trying to get to the South Pole had recently just died, and Shackleton, was trapped with his crew for an extended period because we were pushing our technology right to the edge. That was the early exploration phase. But then our technology got better, and we could get to Antarctica much more reliably. And the airplanes then their engines and their navigation became good enough that we could fly to Antarctica. And suddenly, okay, well, now this is just another place that people can live. I think, Suji, you're in Minnesota today, and I mean, no one could live one night in the winter in Minnesota without technology. It'd kill you. We're not designed for that. But we sort of take it for granted, but we have mastered all of these technologies that allow us to have spread all over the surface of the world, including Antarctica, including the thousands of people that live there and the 100 who live at the South Pole in the dead of winter. And I've heard even the 100,000 people that visit Antarctica on cruise ships every year. This is the transition that's happening in spaceflight right now. We have gone from when Whitney was a very young lad, of just barely being able to explore and get there. And we just about killed the Apollo 13 crew, to now where, okay, the technology's better. And if you peeled the moon and laid it on the Earth, it's bigger than Africa. It's enormous. There's no life. There is no biosphere to disrupt. And it's a largely unsurveyed and completely untapped mineral resource. So that has a lot of allure. And in the last 10 years, we discovered vast reserves of water on the moon, permanently frozen into the shadowed craters at the poles. And so if you have water and you have solar power always at the poles, then it's not that much different than Minnesota. I mean, you can just you just need the right habitat there, and you can live there. So that's that. People would have laughed just like that, Whitney, 10,000 years ago.
I'm laughing because I like making fun of Minnesota primarily.
Well, I'm from Canada. We dream of moving south to Minnesota, so where it's warm. So I think it's easy to ask the question you just asked, but I think it's really important to look at it within the frame of history as to how do we incorporate the latest technology into the quality of the human existence and to better understand the universe around us. And that's the stage we're at with the moon now. Whether we can sustain the international agreements and the financing and, all the other stuff that goes along with big projects, that remains to be seen. But I'm very excited that we've turned that corner, and that's what's happening right now. In fact, tonight, coming back from the moon.
I love it that this is a government-led mission. I was very proud of what NASA did in the original space programs. And there are things that I really love about international space, that governments share information, that it's a joint project, like that we do these things together. And that's how the International Space Station works, for instance, at least in my understanding. But we are going to also have private space companies now. I mean, SpaceX is having its IPO coming up here, which is a very different way of thinking about how to do space. I wondered what your opinions are on the differences between government space exploration, as we've done and as we're doing today, and this future of private space exploration?
Uh, so every spaceship I've ever flown was built by a private company. And the lunar lander was built by Grumman for tremendous profit. And the space shuttle was built by Rockwell. Space station largely built by Boeing and managed by Boeing. Space flight has always been commercial, right from the very beginning, with people making significant profits. But the cost was so high that the only client, even a billionaire, you had to be a trillionaire to fly in space. You had to be the Soviet Union or the United States. Nobody else could afford it. Eventually, Europe started, all of the countries of Europe. What has happened, though, is the improvements in technology are such that a bunch of years ago, a private citizen could buy a flight into space from a private rocket company so that the clientele changed. But the actual mechanics of flying in space, that's always been done by privately produced. Like NASA doesn't build rocket ships and build spaceships. They hire a company to do it. And so they have put a lot of money. You mentioned SpaceX. They have hired SpaceX as a company to build the hardware that then they use in space. And that's slightly different. As the technology's gotten better, you can give more latitude to the company. You don't have to tell them specifically where every bolt and screw needs to be. But the future, though, is interesting. Like, what rules will apply on the moon? Whose laws apply? If you murder someone on the moon, what court would you appear in? And who has territorial rights in Earth orbit? We're sorting that out. But how about on the moon? And who's responsible for orbital debris and all of those things. And technology always gets way out in front of regulation. But we had to play catch up with when Henry Ford started cranking out thousands and thousands of Model Ts in 1915. Think what chaos there was. There were no decent roads, road signs, stoplights, driver's licenses, no infrastructure, gas stations. But the technology was so good that people incorporated it, and then infrastructure and regulation caught up. And same with aviation, and that's the phase we're in now in space flight. We need to do it responsibly. We've got to create rules that society likes, and then enforce those rules, just like we've done for 10,000 years on Earth. And now we're including the moon in that, and that's why I'm working with King Charles on the Astra Carta, which is sort of a governing document, and his Sustainable Markets Initiative. It's why I'm the chair of the Open Lunar Foundation, which is a nonprofit working with governments and the United Nations and lots of companies to try and help set policy for how it is that we should settle the moon. Should we settle it like we did North America? Should we settle it like we did New Zealand, or should we settle it like we did Antarctica? And all of those three were all very different. And it's just purely human will with which we can move forward. And so, yeah, it's a really interesting time in history, not just technologically or scientifically, but geopolitically.
That's fascinating. I'm kind of thinking about what I learned so far after I first fastened my seatbelt about the importance of like Ralph Nader in making seatbelts happen, and sort of thinking about, who will those people be for space? So I want to pivot to talk about your new novel, Final Orbit, which is a Cold War space thriller, and which came out in October. And it's the third book in your Apollo Murders series, which is speculative history, and includes a lot of familiar figures making different choices in different circumstances than they did in our timeline. And a lot of the storyline follows an alternative version of the Apollo-Soyuz mission of 1975. And I wonder if you can just outline for our listeners kind of some of the historical and political context they will find themselves in when they open your book.
Yeah, Apollo-Soyuz, it was the last flight of Apollo. They had, one rocket left and one capsule left. And they're like, what should we do with this? And they thought, wouldn't it be great here just after the Vietnam War and in the sort of a real peak of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States, wouldn't it be nice to show that not everything is horrible? And why don't we take a American spaceship, the last Apollo, and one of the Soviet spaceships, the Soyuz, and dock them together in space? How symbolic can anything be? And have the crews shake hands up there and just demonstrate that we can actually, even under an antagonistic set of circumstances, behave decently and inspiringly. That was the purpose of Apollo-Soyuz. It is slightly ironic that the Soviets called it Soyuz Apollo, but that's okay. They executed that. Two very experienced space flyers were the commanders, American and Soviet, both friends of mine who have since passed away. And when I was looking to write Final Orbit, I thought, what an interesting time. Nixon had just gone through all of that conflagration, and Ford was now president. And Ford had had two attempts on his life that summer, the summer of 75, and two women. One of them who actually fired the pistol and only missed him because the sights were off, and she just bought the pistol that morning or the day before. And then there was the Weather Underground, which was setting off bombs all across the United States in protest against, the man and the machine and all that. So much antagonism after the Vietnam War. And this mission was going on, and the Chinese had a secret space program that almost nobody knew about. And so when I was looking to write Final Orbit, I thought, this is a plot-rich summer in human history, and I'm going to take the reality of all those things, and I'm going to just maybe invent a couple things that just might have happened, and then see how the whole story unfolds. And the book's been, a #1 bestseller. So, and everyone's clamoring for me to write the next book. So I'm very happy with how the book came out.
The main character, I've read this name, but I have not said it aloud. So we'll see how I do. Kazimierz Zemeckis?
Bang on the money. That's how I say it too. I've never met him either, but that's how I say his name.
He's working as Capcom, the capsule communicator, which was a job that you had while this in mission control. That's not the job you had actually. While the crisis unfolds in orbit. How much of his story is inspired by your experiences? I just want to say one of the things that was the importance of the space program in my life was like when I was in lower school, we built a little cardboard capsule and went up in space, and I was laid down. I got to be one of the astronauts. Weirdly, they did a drawing or whatever, and so I was there, and I had to do certain experiments to see how my awareness changed over time and whether I was paying but it was incredibly fun, just imagining. Anyway, that was my experience as capsule commander.
I did the same thing in the school I was at. We built a little space habitat and spent the weekend in there. I was NASA's chief capsule communicator for 25 shuttle flights. And so in a row. And so that's everybody who's sitting in mission control is the
you're
peak
on the ground then. I'm
in
sorry,
the area.
That's where I got confused, right?
Well, I've done both, of course. But,
okay.
But yeah, the capsule communicator is the person in mission control in Houston in this room full of experts. But if you can't have a room full of experts talking to the crew, because it'd be the Tower of Babel. So you take one experienced astronaut, and they are the voice of mission control. They can listen to all the stuff that everybody thinks the crew needs to know about. They can make a judgment, put it in verbiage that the crew's used to, and say it succinctly. And then in the reverse, when the crew says something back to Earth, they can suss out what it was the crew actually meant and make sure that everybody's working on that. And so my years working in mission control, amongst my 3 space flights, were very helpful in making the scenes where Kaz Zemeckis, who's my main protagonist in the 3 books, is a Capcom and is working, especially not just while things are going well, but while things are going extremely badly on orbit. Kaz is the pivot guy down on Earth, figuring out what's going on, and then of course getting into all sorts of nefarious problems in final orbit.
So as we've said, the Apollo-Soyuz mission of 75 was the first crewed international space mission run jointly by the U.S. and the Soviet Union. That's real. And in your book, there is a storyline about China attempting to steal technology, like a classified particle beam weapon, aboard a real American space station abandoned called Skylab. And I wonder if you could just talk. I mean, I know that before you wrote the first book, I was reading about how you kind of prepared yourself to write. You read Stephen King and you kind of thought about plot and fact and fiction. I wonder if you could just say a little bit about how you think about the relationship between accuracy and imagination and maybe read a passage connected to this for us.
Sure. If you're just writing, I don't know, fantasy or something that doesn't have a touchstone of reality in it that everyone's going to recognize, you have a lot of freedom. People have to behave like people, and the physical laws sort of need to apply depending how you're writing. But if you're writing alternative history fiction and the majority of your characters are real people and it's all following the timeline of real events, then you got to get it right. You can't just suddenly have irrational behavior by people, by certain characters that people know, and you can't just pretend that a real historical event didn't happen. You have to be additive, I think, and really do the research. I think other authors know this, but a lot of people would be very surprised at the amount of research that is required to write this type of thing, especially for someone who's flown spaceships. I'm not going to be satisfied with hand waving. I need it to make sense. And so when I discovered, and it used to all be classified, that China had a really active space program in the 60s and the 70s and had chosen astronauts and had built up a whole biomedical study thing, and were training their astronauts, and were building a human-rated spaceship, and had launched satellites already. That gave me the reality with which to include China in the plot of Final Orbit. And this little piece right here is when a real person, a guy named General Sam Phillips, who ran the Apollo program and then went on to be a senior general in the U.S. Air Force, he's talking to Kaz, and Kaz is sort of his protege. Kaz is a real smart guy. And so here's just a little clip from that. Phillips paused, shifting gears. Kaz, I'm not calling about the two of them are talking on the phone, by the way. Kaz is in Houston and General Phillips is in Washington. Kaz, I'm not calling about the bombing. You'll have to read the book to learn what the bombing was, or the attempt on the president's life, he said, but about an interesting phone call I just got. Our friends at NORAD are tracking a new satellite launched a couple of days ago from China. Kaz waited. His MIT PhD was in electro-optics, and he'd been doing analyses of Chinese construction in the high desert south of Mongolia ever since their first suborbital launches there. His expertise in this area was why Phillips had sent him to China with Nixon. You'll have to read the book. We turned the big cameras in Hawaii to have a look, and this is a different design than their two previous orbital satellites. I'll get you pictures as soon as I can, but it's a classic elongated capsule shape designed to withstand reentry. Kaz pictured it. A spy camera able to bring the film back and land under a parachute? Both the Americans and the Soviets had versions of the same technology, though they were transitioning now to digital images that would be beamed back to Earth. Maybe, Kaz, but you know as well as I that it's a small step from there to scale up and man-rate a ship to start flying astronauts. He paused, or cosmonauts, or whatever the Chinese will call them. Surprised, Kaz asked, "You think this ship has someone aboard, General?" That'd be nuts. Well, they would have had to leapfrog several technologies and accept considerable risk. I agree. But it's the trajectory of this satellite that's making me consider it. They launched into a 51.6 degree inclination and are at 239 miles altitude. He waited for Kaz to figure it out. Skylab? Kaz frowned deeply.
That's great. Thank you very much. We're reading this book, as we talked about it, it's sort of turbulent time in America and world history. There's a war going on, for instance. But Artemis II has a multinational and multiracial crew. It's got a Canadian astronaut, as well as the first black person and first woman to go into deep space, which feels very hopeful. But in Final Orbit, you've got elements of national conflict, as we were just listening to in your reading. So I'm just wondering, like, How do you feel about the future of space? Is it going to be a uniting thing, or is it going to be something that divides us?
Well, the way you just described it, it reminds me a little bit of the crew of the Starship Enterprise, right? And that's kind of a nice thing to see because uh, that was a pretty bold example by Gene Roddenberry there in the mid 60s to have that crew. And a little bit ironic that the captain was from Canada, Bill Shatner, but this is actually happening right now. This group of extremely competent people who have the physical or national traits that you just mentioned just went around the moon. And they're not the last, they're the first in a long time. They're opening the path to do this. But it's not going to solve all the problems on Earth. We are this ridiculously imperfect and jealous and suspicious and fearful species who always does stupid stuff, and we always have. And yet, in what I don't know, 300,000 years of history and 10,000 years of civilization, we're still here. We still manage to somehow muddle through, and we build the Sistine Chapel, and we build beautiful. We paint the Mona Lisa, and there's these wonderful examples of what we can accomplish, even within the confines of our own self-destructive imperfections. And so, to me, space exploration, there's nothing mystical or religious or magical about it. It's just going to be an extension of how we've always been, but truly deeply into the third dimension. And we're not going to do it perfectly. We're going to mess it up. But at the same time, I think we're going to get it done. And we are going to continue to learn from it. And if we can do it right, find ways to use all this new information and technology to continue to improve the quality of human life for as many people as possible in some sort of sustainable way. And to me, that's what really excites me about the technology that's involved and the clear example of the goodness and the capability of the 4 people that are coming back from the moon tonight.
So I'm going to squeeze in one last question because I can't resist. And Whitney has talked about what it was like for him to be a little kid thinking about space. I remember as a second grader when my teachers decorated the gym in tinfoil and told us it was the moon and walked us there. A
That was what
glorious
really
moment.
happened.
For a pretty long time, there was a 7-year-old who really wanted to believe that. And the thing about your book is it's so fun. It's a page turner and it's huge fun. And you did allude to the people clamoring for book 4, which rumor has it you have outlined. And I wonder if you can tell us what you're working on and if we might see Kaz again.
Absolutely guaranteed you will see Kaz again, and Svetlana, and JW. Yeah, and my stories have been chronological so far, sequential, and I was looking for what's the next thing that's coming and what would be an interesting world set of events that would provide a time when it would be a chance to progress the characters that I just mentioned. And so I chose, and then I've been doing research for the last 6 months. And I have the whole arc of the plot laid out right now. But as my wife always tells me, enough with research, start writing. And she's right, because you can substitute research for writing forever and never get anything down. And you won't really need to know what you need to research until you start writing. And I read this beautiful quote by an author once who said, you write and you agonize and you self-reflect and you pick at it and you do a whole bunch more research and you make the real careful word choices, and then you move on to the next sentence. And I thought that's exactly what writing is like. One sentence at a time as you work your way and try and make it as succinct and clear but also factual as I possibly can. And so I've written the first 2 chapters of the next book already, and I'm not going to give anything away. But I think it's going to be a real rollicking story. I still need one more plot complexity that hasn't occurred to me yet, but I need to have the book done by the end of the year. And I had my editor retired from the publishing house that she worked for, but I have convinced her that in her retirement she ought to be a consulting editor, and she's agreed to, as she has my previous novel, she's going to edit this one as well. So I'm feeling quite good about it, because the deadline is still a long ways away, but I think I have a plan to get there from here.
I recognize, as a fellow writer, I recognize many of those emotions. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. Listeners, you can find Final Orbit and the rest of the Apollo Murder series at an independent bookstore near you.